Thank you so much, Bernadette, for agreeing to speak to us. I have questions, and these are the questions. First question is, the turbulent history of Northern Ireland affected you in every possible way and vice versa. Looking at your experience, what should ethnic minorities living and working in Northern Ireland know about the history to form an independent opinion about this place?
That's a big question, and I have to say that when I read the question first, I found it amusing from a Northern Ireland perspective to say, why are we so self-obsessed that we would assume that people from other ethnic backgrounds, who are only minority ethnic backgrounds here, I mean, they are majority ethnic backgrounds in their own countries. So the question of what people need to know about our history was interesting, because people from the island of Ireland, and particularly people from the United Kingdom, travel the whole world ignorant and oblivious of any other country's history that is not related to them personally or nationally, and feel no need to learn anything about it, no need to know anything about culture or traditions or anything, but then are obsessed with the idea that everybody who arrives on our shores would need to know everything about what makes us special. And I just find that interesting for me. The question that I'd say, what would people arriving here not knowing what makes us the slightly crazy folk that we are, what would they know about us to keep themselves safe in a society that has very clear cultural, traditional, unspoken markers for a divided society that are not easily translated to other people. Mm-hmm. And my memories of that in terms of from 2000, which would be after the Good Friday Agreement, the first arrival of any significant new numbers of people from other places to fill labour shortage gaps was indeed how best to keep people safe from racism, which is simply a form of sectarianism, or more correctly, sectarianism is a very detailed form of racism, of both of them forms of prejudice. So in looking at that and working with people, which was work that we were doing, people from Northern Ireland and people coming in from Poland, from Portugal, Lithuania, but originally from Portugal, and therefore either white from, or predominantly white from Portugal as a country, or people with Portuguese nationality who were by and large, or Portuguese citizenship, who were of nationality from various African countries that were former colonies. And discovered, it's very difficult for people who don't know what's going on here to figure out why paving stones are painted in some areas. And so if you just thought, well, it's like window boxes, you might be tempted to paint your own curbstone. and make a crucial error if you preferred a colour that didn't fit. So the very simplest of things, I remember very early on that the rule of thumb for the immigrant population, of course people from other minority backgrounds, people from other ethnic backgrounds who'd been here for generations already are aware of the things that go on here. But if you were new, the rule of thumb was if you see anybody putting up flags of any description, stay in for about 3 days. And in 2000, that's what people from other places who were new to here learnt very quickly to do. Stay in, because nothing good seems to come of people hanging out colours. Whereas maybe in the country they'd come from, within their own culture, these were celebrations. But here they would be occasions for some form of celebratory madness, followed by a row, and almost inevitably accompanied by people marching up and down streets with bands of one hue or another, and serious amounts of alcohol being consumed on all sides. So if you weren't at the party, staying home was a good idea. So for me, I think the issue of people who are not from here, who have, for whatever reason, come to make their life here temporarily or permanently, the starting point is not what do you need to know about us so that you fit in, but what are the practical things you might know about how our history manifests itself today, not about our past, but how it has affected our present, so that you having enough issues to worry about in terms of being an outsider and viewed as an outsider, of being exposed to various degrees of xenophobia or racism or religious intolerance, but basically prejudice, which excuses itself as fear of the other. But anyway, how do you keep yourself safe from the manifestations of those traditions that are not positive? And I think that to my recollection, was the first, if you like, spark of interest of people from other places in the political history of this place. Was not out of idle curiosity or how to play your proper part in enjoying our centenary, but from the very beginning, how do we protect ourselves from some of the unpleasant present manifestations of the divisions that exist here. And then I think when people feel relatively safe, they can then be curious about, I wonder how they got to be like that, what's causing that?
Yes.
Why why, I suppose, externally, if you look at Northern Ireland, also funny people who, the number of people who, when they emigrated to the United Kingdom, didn't realise that there was a part of it separated by the sea from the rest of it, because people who are not looking at it from the inside, by and large, think the UK and Great Britain are the same size and shape. You know, the bit about the other island doesn't reach Guinea-Bissau. You have to wait till you come from Guinea-Bissau to here. and realise that although you've come to the United Kingdom, you can't visit your friends in Manchester by train,
Right.
which you could if you were in London. So they were very practical ways in which people begin to learn that Northern Ireland is a place apart from Great Britain, but within the United Kingdom. And if you're then curious about how that came about, you begin to look at the history. So I think that's the way I would look at it, rather than, what would they need to know? Why would they need to know anything if they didn't want to? Other than not knowing can actually be bad for your health in Northern Ireland. And that's the question that should be asked, is what's wrong with the way we live that creates that for people who join us? And in a way it's not unique either. It's because we're so small and because it's so recent. There aren't many European entities as young as the Irish Republic as a sovereign state, which of course then changes where we are. So that's the way I looked at it, first of all, because it answered, it was a different starting point for me.
Which makes perfectly, it makes sense, because the safety first, wherever you go, you want to be safe.
Yeah.
And then you can dwell on things in order to learn, as you say, the causes. Okay. So that would make me reformulate the second question, I think, because the second question was how to reach ethnic minorities to teach them this history. Do we have to? We don't. But if we think that it's useful, how to do that?
Again, so if you start where I'm starting from,
yes, please. Yeah.
Then the next question follows naturally. When people then have moved beyond the point of safety, the questions they have and the starting point for what they want to know is the starting point at which you share knowledge, because people will want to know and they're not quite sure where then to get the information. People by that stage will already figure out that the answer will depend on who you ask.
Yes.
They'll already have figured that bit out in the process of keeping themselves safe from the outworkings of our history, and not saying the wrong thing in the wrong place, or not being in the wrong place in the wrong colours, or all those things that I don't need to explain to people from other ethnic backgrounds who might be watching this. They know that. But it takes you to a different perspective, not to say, which always interests me, is to say, how do you reach people from minority ethnic backgrounds living in Northern Ireland? Try using your legs.
Simple as that, that's true.
Try using your arms. Try going. Because people from other backgrounds, that's how they reached us. Yeah. That's how they reached us. They came here. So if you want to reach people living here, shift yourself and go to where the people are and meet the people on their own terms, which is what we ask of people when they come in here. So, what do we say? What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. So, it's not rocket science. And then the truth comes out. Why is it difficult? Well, we can speak to people who can speak English. But if the people we want to speak to maybe don't speak English, oh my God, the sky will fall down on Chicken Licken's head. Because we have discovered a deficit in the people we want to talk to, but not in ourselves. So it's never, oh, I can't speak to that Polish person. Do you know why? I don't know any Polish. I mean, how many Northern Ireland people have said, oh, it's minority ethnic people, as they describe them, but other people, speakers of other languages, are hard to talk to because they don't speak English. No, they're hard for you to talk to because you don't speak Polish or whatever. And then the other fear is, but I can't learn every language. I share with you that once a professional person providing a public service approached STEP to ask if we could put a meeting, of people from the national minorities so that they could explain their services. And we said, well, yes, but which language? Oh, they said, do they not all speak the same language, the same as us? And I said, what language do you think that would be? Other, because or foreign. I mean, do you know a language called foreign or a language called? At which point, of course, their brain kicked in. But for a moment, they had thought, somebody, they just hadn't thought through that process.
Which is strange, because if it was a service provider, that should be a first thing.
Yeah, only if you have. Well, no, I do say it was going back 2000, 2001.
Okay.
No, not if you don't have any cultural competence. Oh, you could have a doctorate. But if unconsciously you thought God made the world white and speaking English, then the deficit is somewhere else. So if you want to reach minority ethnic interest in Northern Ireland's history, I think it's a sharing of knowledge and information. It's not teaching people anything. It's not because if we were looking at it from shared perspectives, there are commonalities in everybody's history. If people want to understand what is so bizarre about this place, especially people from Europe, if the starting point is not here, but the starting point is European empires, then everybody's in this conversation, because everybody's history, everybody's present is shaped by the history of Imperial Europe.
Absolutely.
The problem with that is that the history of Imperial Europe isn't really taught in Northern Ireland schools. So we couldn't really teach anybody anything about that because we don't know when. We don't know enough. And I think the point that I'm making is that if we joined in an equitable, egalitarian knowledge sharing about all of our cultures, then people might engage in that. That's an interesting place to start. Because, for example, we started our centenary by asking the people who live here, how old is their country? We'd be starting from some kind of shared point to say, oh, how old are the nations and states from which we all come? And then everybody would have the same complicated conversation. The Portuguese would be telling us how they used to be an empire and then the Spanish knocked them out of the empire ring. Or the French would tell us about how they have an entitlement to be an empire, only the Germans knocked them out.
Italians.
The ring. The Italians would say, well, I tell you, we're small but beautifully formed, and the Vatican's the biggest empire in the world. So count us in with the big guys. So you'd have a very different conversation in which we might learn. I mean, we as people within the context of the Northern Ireland centenary might learn more than we would teach.
Right.
And we might have something better to celebrate in the next 100 years goes by.
So the key point is sharing, not imposing any version of history, but sharing and engaging in this sharing process.
Yeah, because then people who are coming from Asia have a bigger understanding and a bigger devastating effect about partition.
Yes.
People coming from Africa can have a bigger and more devastating impact of lines being drawn across their country that they weren't involved in drawing.
Any consideration for yes.
So all of the things that we're looking at wouldn't become so unique, and that would be good for us.
So Northern Ireland is 101 years old. There are two narrations, two stories, two mindsets about it. How to navigate it?
Mm-hmm. Again, I'd say, I remember one of my children who was asked me, and they were only about 8-year-old at the time, how many truths are there?
Right.
Because they had become aware of the truth in people, and people around them saying one thing about a person somebody's hero being somebody else's villain. And he said, how many truths are there about the same thing? And I said, there are as many stories as there are people who tell them. And then you have to hear them all and make up your own mind what is your own truth. Because there is very little single truth. It depends on what you consider the truth to be. And I thought, if kids at 8 can query how many truths are there, so we created, and it was a relatively new invention, to create the two stories around initially ethnic nationality, for which religion became a marker. So the things that might be uncovered in our history was the first organised move, the people who first led the organised rebellion for an independent Republic of Ireland with 32 counties in it were Presbyterians. They were Protestants.
Right.
They were the United Irish Men were led by the Protestants of Belfast.
Right.
And they were merchants. And the leader of that rebellion said, if the merchant classes fail us, the people of no property will not. So essentially it was a bourgeois republican revolution, inspired by the French Revolution, very much like the American Revolution, and in both cases led by an emerging new thought of independent conscience, both culturally, morally, religiously. but led by the development of a merchant, a middle class.
Right.
So the reason I tell you that is that there are three stories, if you want, the way you put it. The two stories here were first about the landless against the landlords. So you and that would be the same in any country. So there's a history here, yes, which I'm very interested in because, when I went to Parliament, I said I was a peasant in the Hall of the Great. I didn't say I was a worker, although I was working class, but I'm a peasant. I was born and reared on the land, and I value the land. I'm a member of the working class because I have to share. If I don't work, I don't eat. Yeah. I have no, as my father said, my parents didn't steal and pass it on to me. Which is, so the first, there's a complicated history around land, around women. So these two stories can be whichever two communities you want.
Exactly.
But they're always the struggle of inequality. They're always the struggle of the people on the bottom to get a fairer share of whatever is going around. But as I said, it's a fairly modern phenomenon to narrow the history of Northern Ireland into the Catholic, Protestant, nationalist, loyalist background. And a very nod to that is the sort of, what they now say, Republican, nationalist and loyalist, unionist, Protestant, unionist, loyalist, Catholic, these funny categories people create. But within the broad political history, the biggest movements have been social justice movements. They've been around land. They're not about religion.
Absolutely.
They've been around land, the Land League. They've been around democracy and devolution, which is Grattan's Parliament.
Equality.
They've been around equality, both in terms of workers' rights, women's rights, but always what has been used by the British establishment has been to weaken those movements by introducing the fear, and you saw it again in the last election.
Yes.
The fear, So if you look at, sometimes you learn a lot from the slogans. Home rule is Rome rule, cried the loyalists of the north. And the home rulers, because of course home rule was not really supported by the Vatican. The radical movement in Ireland said, our religion may come from Rome, but our politics will come from home. And basically tell the church to mind its own business. People also forget that, the historic battles around the Battle of the Boyne, which is the big marker, that's King William on his horse in Belfast, that the Vatican supported William. The Pope was a Williamite because of nothing to do with Ireland, or the Pope was a Williamite because of his problems with the French. And so it's because we don't know the history of Europe that we don't know the history of this place. Or some people don't. I do. And in many ways, You know, I didn't know that what I knew as a child was history until I went to second level education and had to separate the fairies and the Dungannon and the folklore and the mythology and the history into different compartments. To me, they were all stories my father told me. And then I had to revise them as I went along, saying, he didn't tell me that, but oh, I didn't know that. And understanding that there is another perspective. And then at the end of it, you're entitled to say, I'd still rather be me.
Right.
But you really don't know who you are if you don't get that 360 look at what it would look like if you weren't you. What would it look like if you were that person over there? What would it look like if you were William out of CWA? What would it look like if you were Lillian out of Northwest Migrant Forum, whose origins are in Kenya? You know, what would it look like if you were somebody else? And then you're entitled, you know, to revise and grow. But that's the only way I know how to learn. I think teaching is overrated as an activity.
That would be another very long discussion, fascinating discussion about the process.
And it's also a very hierarchical
yes.
idea that still, you know, it's still the basis of our universities and all kinds of things. But if you go back to the 60s, never mind the centenary, you go back 50 years to educational revolts, the Paris communes, etc. We lost a lot of that, the teaching as a hierarchical imparting of superior knowledge very much reasserted itself. So maybe this will put a wee dent in it again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.